Chapter 1. Strict Beginnings. Yuko stared at the clock, her heart racing as the hands moved agonizingly slowly. It was just after 6 in the morning, and the house was eerily silent. A light from the hallway illuminated the wooden door of her room, casting long shadows across the old tatami mats. She knew her parents would be awake soon, already immersed in their daily rituals, as their commitment to education and discipline eclipsed any fragment of joy or spontaneity in their lives. In the Liu household, every minute was accounted for. There was no room for idleness, and each day was mapped out with military precision. Since she could remember, the air had been thick with unyielding expectations. A trophy on the shelf here, a framed certificate there, each represented hours of hard work. But none of these accolades brought any warmth to the cold walls of their home. Yuko often wondered if the warmth was hidden within her parents, buried beneath layers of ambition, frustration, and harsh love. With a quiet sigh, she slipped out of bed, careful not to let the floor creak. She tiptoed to the kitchen, where a simple breakfast awaited: steamed rice, pickled vegetables, and miso soup. Her mother, a historian with a reputation for strictness, had insisted on a nutritious start to every day. But the food felt like a task to her, another item on her parents' checklist of control. As she chewed her food, longing for something sweeter, she could hear her mother's voice in the back of her mind, reminding her to be grateful, to strive for excellence. "Yuko," her mother called, snapping her from her thoughts. "You have homework to finish before school. Don't waste time." Yuko nodded, fighting the urge to roll her eyes. She quickly put away the dishes, hurrying into her tiny room for her school supplies. Surrounded by stacks of textbooks and neatly organized notebooks, her workspace felt suffocating. Each assignment felt like a chain, binding her tighter into the regime her parents had established. It wasn't that Yuko was unwilling to learn. In fact, she always excelled in her studies. The pressure only mounted as her parents began to compare her to the other children in the neighborhood, children who smiled and laughed while riding their bicycles or playing carefree games outside. For Yuko, those moments were an unknown luxury, as alien as distant shores. Sneaking outside was an act of rebellion for Yuko, a breath of fresh air she could never afford within her home. After school, once the sun dipped low enough that she could escape the scrutiny of her parents, she would slip into the shadows, sprinting down the street, where the shouts of children playing echoed like music. She often met up with friends in secret, feeling alive for the first time as she joined them in games of tag or hopscotch, even if just for a fleeting moment. Yet even the joy of friendship was tainted. The laughter weighed on her, a reminder that she was living two lives, one dictated by her parents, the other a whisper of freedom. Returning home would strip away any remnants of joy, leaving her to navigate the criticism, the expectations, and sometimes the violence that followed mistakes. "Why can't you be more like Aiko?" Her mother would thunder, eyes blazing like hot coals. "She has straight A's and participates in extracurriculars. If you can't make me proud, what's the point?" The trail of tears that followed those words was etched deep in her memory as Yuko felt the sting of neglect biting into her heart. She yearned for affection, but received frustration in return, a cruel twist of fate that rendered her love unreciprocated, except for the day when her younger sister, Ayako, had come into their lives. When Ayako was born, Yuko had felt a flicker of hope that perhaps there would be enough love to share. Her parents, however, showered the infant with boundless adoration, displaying a kind of devotion Yuko felt she could never earn. It was not long before Yuko found herself in the shadows again, lost behind the glimmering image of a perfect sister who could do no wrong. At school, Yuko's loneliness only deepened. Despite her stellar grades, she was often overlooked, a mere ghost among her peers, too timid to step forward and engage in idle chit-chat or share secrets. As the months rolled into years, the emotional distance widened, plunging her deeper into the abyss of isolation. Everything changed one fateful day in January when the earth shook beneath their feet. The Great Hanshin earthquake reverberated through their small town, shattering the fractured facade of her family in an instant. Yuko bolted upright in bed, the tremors rattling her windows and sending her heart racing. She glanced around in a panic, her eyes darting to her parents' room, but relativity time seemed to shift as she witnessed her mother collapsing protectively over Ayako. Her father was already rushing toward them, mindful of the potential danger. Yet amidst the chaos, Yuko felt extraordinarily alone, ensconced in her little bubble of fear. In the tumultuous aftermath, as she pulled the covers tighter around her trembling body, she felt invisible. It was the first time she realized her family's love was conditional, woven intricately into the fabric of achievement and perceived value. The earthquake left them shaken, yes, but it did not mend the invisible scars that had marred Yuko's heart. "Mommy, Mommy!" Ayako cried, her voice high-pitched and frantic. Yuko wanted to comfort her but feared moving from the safety of her corner beneath the heavy blankets that felt like a shield. The helplessness engulfed her as she squeezed her eyes shut, wishing more than anything that she could morph into something of significance. As time trudged on following the disaster, Yuko found herself drowning in despair. The earthquake had physically shook the ground beneath them, but it acutely highlighted the emotional earthquakes that were erupting within her family. Her parents, now treading through their shattered lives, directed their cumulative resentment toward Yuko, and their harsh words crushed her spirit further. "Happiness is a choice, Yuko," her mother would often say in the aftershocks of the aftermath. "You are not a victim. Do you want to end up like your father's brother, a failure who couldn't even take care of himself?" Yuko endeavored to be strong, the path of resilience trodden deeply into her heart, a response to the relentless waves of disappointment. However, as her family battled through the ruins of their lives, she lacked the coping mechanisms to stand strong. By the time she reached middle school, the pressure to excel mounted exponentially, and her escape into the shadows became a necessary retreat. With every scolding from her parents, she slowly withdrew, shilling out her emotions like coins from a piggy bank, crumbling under the pressure to fulfill the weight of expectations. It was no surprise those expectations led her to a boarding school at the insistence of her parents. Leaving was bittersweet. Part of her ached to escape the suffocating environment, while the other mourned the loss of familiar routines. The days flew by as a different reality awakened within her at the boarding school, the laughter of others invigorating her senses. She reveled in the newfound freedoms of karaoke nights and impromptu adventures through shared camaraderie. Yet, every time the weekend rolled around, returning home felt more daunting, like a soldier confronting the front lines of an inevitable battle. In that place, loneliness grew like grass through cracks in the sidewalk, persistent and unyielding. Upon returning to her lonely home every Sunday evening, she felt unwelcome, like stingy moonlight filtering through blinds. Her parents fought bitterly, belittling her tender attempts at connection, and crowned her with crowns of thorns woven from unwarranted insults. As the years trudged forward, the discontent in her family expanded, suffocating her under the weight of their bitterness and disappointment. By the time she reached high school, Yuko found herself wishing for the forgotten years of childhood when innocence was hers to embrace. The turning point came in her sophomore year, when the break from her family enticed her hopes anew. It was the summer of her second year when Yuko made the courageous decision to live independently while finishing her studies. The thrill of carving out her own space felt like a phoenix rising from ashes. But with independence came loneliness, as independence did not always mean freedom. In the throes of adolescence, she seized every moment with vigor, yet that hollow ache persisted, gnawing at the edges of her spirit. The weight of her family's indifference transformed into an unbearable burden, and even friendships felt transient amid the vastness of her heartache. What could have been? She would wonder late at night, longing for the companionship of a real family. As she navigated through her loneliness, her heart clung to the threads of what constituted love, a concept that felt ever elusive. When Yuko first met Kenji, a boy from school, it was as though the universe had finally recognized her plea. Kenji was different. He listened, laughed, and held her hand as if shielding her from the emotional typhoon from home. But as all flares of companionship are wont to do, it faded into the darkness of love's uncertainty. High school culminated in swirling chaos of emotions, drawing Yuko into inevitable entanglements that only further deepened her isolation. At age 18, while the world outside blossomed with opportunities, Yuko stood paralyzed, shackled by ties of familial disappointment, unsure if she would ever truly find her footing in a world where love felt like wandering through a dense fog eternally. Yet even as she felt lost, a flicker of hope remained, stars that shone softly in the expansive void, a promise of endless horizons beyond the constraints of her upbringing. If only she could learn to navigate the treacherous waters of loneliness, perhaps one day she could discover the love she desperately sought. Every star told a story, waiting for her to find it, and as the night deepened in the distance, she clung to the fragile thread of hope. She was destined for more than the confines of her upbringing. She would begin to chart her own journey through the vast cosmos of loneliness, love, and everything in between. Each star in the sky held the possibilities of what lay ahead, guiding her forward, whispering, "You are not alone. You are destined for a life beyond your beginnings."